I was running my bush hog across the back 40 acres of my property when I saw the police cruiser pulling up my long driveway, lights flashing like I was some kind of criminal. The roar of the tractor engine drowned out most sounds, but I could see Deputy Martinez getting out of his vehicle, and behind him was another car, a silver sedan that I recognized immediately. It belonged to Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, and she was already pointing at me like I had just committed a federal crime. I shut down the bush hog and climbed off the tractor, pulling off my work gloves and wiping the sweat from my forehead. It was June in central Texas, just outside of Killeen, and the temperature had to be pushing 95 degrees. I had been out here since 7 in the morning, clearing the fire breaks that the county required, and now it was barely noon. "Deputy Martinez," I said, walking over to meet them. "What seems to be the problem?" Patricia was already talking before the deputy could get a word in. "Mr. Harrison, you are violating multiple HOA codes and ordinances. The noise ordinance clearly states that no loud machinery can be operated before 10 in the morning or after 6 in the evening on weekdays, and you have been running that monstrosity since dawn." I looked at her, then at the deputy, who seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Madam, I started at 7, which is well after the noise ordinance allows, and I am performing county-mandated work on my property. That does not give you the right to disturb the entire neighborhood," Patricia snapped back. She was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair that looked like it had been styled with a can of hairspray, and an attitude that could curdle milk. "The HOA board met last night, and we decided that your bush hogging operation is creating an eyesore and disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of our community." Deputy Martinez held up his hand. "Mrs. Hendricks, let me handle this. Mr. Harrison," she filed a complaint about the noise and the dust. "Can you tell me what you are doing out here?" I nodded and gestured to the cleared strips of land behind me. "I am maintaining firebreaks. The county requires property owners with more than 20 acres to maintain adequate firebreaks during fire season. I have 60 acres here, and the range manager from the Texas A&M Forest Service came out 3 weeks ago to mark exactly where these breaks need to be. I have the paperwork in the house if you need to see it." Patricia was not backing down. "This is a residential community, not a ranch. You cannot just clear land whenever you feel like it. The HOA has rules about landscaping changes, and you did not submit any plans for approval." "This is not a landscaping change," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is fire prevention required by the county. It supersedes any HOA rules." The deputy looked between us. "Mr. Harrison, do you have that paperwork handy? I would like to see it to verify your claim." I walked to the house with both of them following me. My wife Tessa would have found this whole situation hilarious if she was home, but she was at work at the elementary school in Killeen. I grabbed the folder from my office that contained all the documentation from the range manager, including the site visit report, the fire break specifications, and the letter from the county explaining the requirements. Deputy Martinez reviewed the papers carefully, while Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently on my porch. The deputy finally looked up and handed the papers back to me. "Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Harrison. You are in compliance with county fire prevention regulations. Mrs. Hendricks, I understand your concern about the noise, but he is operating within the legal time frame and performing required maintenance." Patricia's face turned red. "This is unacceptable. The HOA board will be taking further action. We have rules for a reason, and no one is above them." "Madam, county and state regulations override HOA rules," Deputy Martinez explained patiently. "Mr. Harrison is not doing anything illegal." After they left, I went back to work, but I knew this was not over. Patricia Hendricks had been the HOA president for 3 years, and she ran the association like it was her personal fiefdom. She had tried to fine people for having the wrong shade of mailbox, for parking their work trucks in their own driveways, and for planting flowers that were not on the approved list. I had managed to stay under her radar for the most part since we moved here 2 years ago, but apparently that grace period was over. That evening, I got a call from Jake Sullivan, my neighbor who lived about half a mile down the road. He was in his late 60s, retired from the military, and had been dealing with Patricia and the HOA board for years. "Sam, I heard about your run-in with Patricia today," he said. "Word travels fast in this neighborhood. I wanted to give you a heads up that she is planning to call an emergency HOA meeting to discuss your property." "Great," I muttered. "What can she actually do? I have all the proper documentation from the county." "That does not matter to her," Jake said. "She will try to fine you, put a lien on your property, or make your life miserable until you stop. I have seen her do it to other people. Remember the Johnsons? They moved out last year because they could not take her harassment anymore." I remembered the Johnsons. They had been good people who made the mistake of painting their house a shade of gray that was slightly off from the approved color palette. Patricia had fined them repeatedly, sent them threatening letters, and even tried to take them to court. Eventually, they just sold their house and left. "I am not backing down," I said. "This is about fire safety, not HOA aesthetics." "I know, and I support you," Jake said. "Just be prepared for a fight." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. I spent the intervening days doing research on Texas property law, HOA regulations, and county fire codes. I also reached out to Marcus Williams, the range manager who had come to my property to assess the firebreak requirements. Marcus was incredibly helpful. He explained that the firebreaks were not optional, and that the county had been cracking down on enforcement after a bad fire season the previous year. Several properties had been damaged, and one house had been completely destroyed because adequate firebreaks had not been maintained. "I can come to your HOA meeting if you want," Marcus offered. "I have dealt with these situations before. Sometimes people do not understand the importance of fire prevention until it is too late." I gratefully accepted his offer. Having an official representative from the Texas A&M Forest Service would carry a lot more weight than just me arguing with Patricia. Thursday evening arrived, and I drove to the community center with all my documentation. Tessa came with me for moral support. She was a petite woman with dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude that had served her well as a fourth-grade teacher. "I cannot believe they are making such a big deal out of this," she said as we walked into the building. "You are literally trying to prevent fires." The community center was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the meeting, and half the neighborhood had shown up to see what would happen. Patricia was at the front of the room with the other board members. Brenda Carmichael, the vice president, who was in her mid-40s and always wore too much jewelry. Robert Chen, the treasurer, who was a quiet accountant that rarely spoke. And Linda Foster, the secretary, who seemed to go along with whatever Patricia wanted. Marcus Williams arrived a few minutes after we did, wearing his official uniform and carrying a briefcase full of documents and fire prevention materials. He introduced himself to me and Tessa, and we took seats near the front. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. "We are here tonight to address a serious violation of HOA rules and regulations by Samuel Harrison of 4782 Ranch Road." Mr. Harrison has been operating heavy machinery on his property without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, creating noise pollution, dust, and an eyesore that affects property values throughout our community. Several people in the audience murmured and nodded. I could see some of my neighbors looking at me with disapproval, probably because they had only heard Patricia's version of events. Patricia continued. The HOA covenants clearly state that any major changes to property landscaping must be submitted for review and approval. Mr. Harrison has cleared significant portions of his land without following this process. The board is recommending a fine of $500 for the initial violation, plus $100 per day, until the property is restored to its original condition. I stood up. Mrs. Hendricks, may I respond to these accusations? Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. You will have your turn to speak. Thank you. I would like to introduce Marcus Williams, who is the range manager for this district with the Texas A&M Forest Service. He can explain why the work I am doing is not only legal but required by the county. Marcus stood and walked to the front of the room. He projected an air of authority and competence that immediately commanded respect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Williams, and I work with the Texas A&M Forest Service on wildfire prevention and range management. I visited Mr. Harrison's property 3 weeks ago at the request of the county to assess his firebreak requirements. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a map and several documents. Bell County has designated this area as moderate to high risk for wildfires, especially during the summer months. Property owners with 20 acres or more are required to maintain fire breaks according to specific guidelines. These fire breaks are cleared strips of land, typically 30 to 50 feet wide, that create barriers to prevent fires from spreading. Patricia interrupted. This is all very interesting, Mr. Williams, but it does not change the fact that Mr. Harrison violated HOA rules. Marcus did not let her derail him. Actually, Mrs. Hendricks, it does. Texas Property Code Section 202.003 states that property owner associations cannot prohibit or restrict activities required by county, state, or federal law. Firebreak maintenance is mandated by the county, which means your HOA cannot prevent Mr. Harrison from completing this work. There was a murmur through the crowd, and I could see some people looking at Patricia with different expressions now. Marcus was not done. Furthermore, failure to maintain adequate fire breaks can result in county fines ranging from $1,000 to $5,000. And in the event of a fire, property owners can be held liable for damages if their negligence contributed to the spread of the fire. What Mr. Harrison is doing is not only protecting his own property, but also protecting yours. Patricia's face was getting redder by the second. We were not informed of any county requirements. This is the first we are hearing about this. Marcus pulled out another document. The county sent notices to all property owners in this area back in March. I have a copy of the mailing list here, and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA was included. Did you not receive it? Brenda Carmichael, the vice president, spoke up for the first time. Patricia, did we get something from the county about this? I do not remember seeing it. Patricia shuffled through some papers on the table in front of her. I receive dozens of notices and documents every week. I cannot be expected to remember every single piece of mail. This was a priority notice marked as urgent, Marcus said calmly. It required a response within 30 days. When we did not hear back from the HOA, we assumed you had received the information and were in compliance. I stood again. I want to make it clear that I am not trying to cause problems with the HOA or my neighbors. I am simply doing what the county requires me to do. I would be happy to share all my documentation with anyone who wants to see it. In fact, I would encourage other property owners with large lots to check if they also need to maintain fire breaks. Jake Sullivan stood up from the back of the room. I have 65 acres, and I received the notice from the county. I have been maintaining my fire breaks for the past month. Sam is doing the right thing, and the HOA should be supporting him, not trying to fine him. Another voice spoke up. It was Margaret Torres, who lived on the north side of the community. My husband and I lost our home in a wildfire in California before we moved here. Fire prevention is not something to take lightly. If Mr. Harrison is following county requirements, he should be commended, not punished. The mood in the room was shifting. Patricia could sense she was losing control of the narrative. This is not just about the fire breaks. The noise and dust are legitimate concerns. Other residents have complained about being disturbed. Who has complained? I asked. Can they speak up so I can address their concerns directly? Silence. No one raised their hand or said anything. Patricia looked around the room, clearly expecting someone to back her up, but no one did. Tessa stood up next to me. My husband starts work at 7 in the morning, which is within the noise ordinance guidelines. He takes a break during the hottest part of the day and stops working by 6 in the evening. He is being more than reasonable. And as for the dust, we live in Texas. There is always dust. It is part of living in a rural area. Robert Chen, the treasurer, finally spoke. Mrs. Hendricks, it seems like we may have overreacted to this situation. If Mr. Harrison is in compliance with county regulations, I do not think the HOA has grounds to fine him. Patricia looked furious. We have rules for a reason. If we start making exceptions, the entire system falls apart. Marcus Williams interjected again. This is not an exception. This is a legal requirement that supersedes your HOA rules. You have no choice in this matter. If you attempt to fine Mr. Harrison or prevent him from completing the required firebreak maintenance, he would have grounds to sue the HOA for interference with legally mandated activities. That statement hung in the air like a bomb. The last thing any HOA wanted was a lawsuit that they would almost certainly lose. Linda Foster, the secretary, whispered something to Patricia, who looked like she had just bitten into a lemon. Fine, Patricia said through gritted teeth. The board will table the motion to fine Mr. Harrison pending further review of the county regulations. However, we expect all residents to be more communicative with the board in the future before undertaking major projects on their property. I was communicative, I said firmly. I submitted a notice to the HOA office 2 weeks before I started work, explaining what I would be doing and why. I have the certified mail receipt to prove it. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. I never received any such notice. Would you like me to provide a copy of the tracking information showing it was delivered and signed for? I asked. There was another long pause. Brenda looked at Patricia with an expression that suggested she was starting to realize that their president might not have been entirely truthful about certain things. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, with Marcus providing information packets about wildfire prevention to anyone who wanted them. Several neighbors came up to me afterward to apologize for jumping to conclusions and to thank me for taking fire safety seriously. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA informing me that my annual dues were being increased by $3,000 to cover special assessments for property violations and legal consultation fees. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks and referenced a board vote that had been taken at a special meeting that I had not been notified about. I immediately called Jake Sullivan, who confirmed that several other residents who had spoken up at the meeting had also received similar letters. The HOA was retaliating against us for challenging Patricia's authority. That was when I decided to take things to the next level. I contacted an attorney named David Shapiro who specialized in HOA disputes. He reviewed all the documentation, including the certified mail receipts showing I had notified the HOA, the county fire prevention requirements, and the letter about the increased dues. "This is pretty clear-cut retaliation," David said. "The HOA cannot legally increase your dues as punishment for complying with county regulations. They also cannot hold special meetings without proper notice to all members. Do you want to pursue legal action?" "What are my options?" I asked. "We can file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, retaliation, and violation of their own bylaws. We can also report them to the Texas Real Estate Commission, which oversees HOA management companies. If we can prove that Mrs. Hendricks deliberately withheld the county notice about firebreak requirements and has been retaliating against residents who challenge her, she could be removed from the board." I thought about it. I did not want to spend months in legal battles, but I also was not going to let Patricia and the HOA board bully me and my neighbors into submission. "Let me talk to the other affected residents first. If we are going to do this, we should do it together." Over the next week, I met with Jake Sullivan, Margaret Torres, and 3 other neighbors who had received similar retaliation letters. We pooled our resources and hired David Shapiro to represent all of us. He filed a formal complaint with the Texas Real Estate Commission and sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, demanding that they rescind the increased dues and stop all retaliatory actions. Patricia's response was to double down. She sent out a mass email to all HOA members claiming that we were troublemakers trying to destroy the community, and that the board was simply trying to maintain property values and quality of life. She called another emergency meeting to discuss the insurgent faction that was attempting to undermine the HOA. This meeting was even more packed than the first one. By this point, word had spread throughout the entire community about what was happening, and people were starting to take sides. Some residents supported Patricia and believed that the HOA needed strong leadership to prevent the neighborhood from declining. Others were tired of her heavy-handed tactics and constant harassment over minor issues. David Shapiro attended this meeting with us, which seemed to surprise Patricia. She had not expected us to bring legal representation. He stood up during the public comment period and laid out exactly what the HOA had done wrong. "The board has violated multiple provisions of their own bylaws and Texas property code," David explained. First, they attempted to fine residents for complying with legally mandated county fire prevention requirements. Second, they held a special meeting without providing proper notice to all members, which violates the bylaws. Third, they imposed punitive special assessments on residents as retaliation for speaking out at a public meeting, which violates both the bylaws and state law. Fourth, there is evidence that the board president deliberately withheld important county notices from the membership. He paused to let that sink in. "My clients are prepared to file a lawsuit against the HOA and individual board members for harassment, retaliation, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of state property code. However, we would prefer to resolve this matter without litigation. We are demanding that the board immediately rescind all retaliatory special assessments, provide a written apology to the affected residents, and implement new procedures to ensure that all county and state notices are promptly distributed to the membership." Patricia stood up, shaking with anger. "How dare you come in here and make threats? This board has worked tirelessly to maintain this community. We do not have to tolerate this kind of disrespect." "It is not a threat, Mrs. Hendricks," David said calmly. "It is a legal reality. If you continue down this path, you will lose, and it will cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages. Money that comes from every homeowner's dues, not just from my clients." That statement got people's attention. Robert Chen, the treasurer, looked genuinely alarmed. "How much are we talking about in potential damages?" "Based on similar cases in Texas, anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, plus legal fees," David said. "And if we can prove willful misconduct by board members, there could be personal liability as well." The room erupted in conversation. People were turning to each other, arguing, questioning, demanding answers from the board. Brenda Carmichael was having a heated, whispered conversation with Linda Foster. Robert Chen was frantically taking notes. Patricia tried to regain control by banging her gavel, but people were not settling down. Finally, Jake Sullivan stood up and whistled loudly, which got everyone's attention. "I have lived in this community for 15 years, he said. "I have served on this board in the past. I have seen good leadership and bad leadership. What is happening now is bad leadership. Patricia, you have done some good things for this neighborhood, but you have also overstepped your authority and created unnecessary conflicts. The board needs to stop fighting residents who are trying to do the right thing and start working with them." Margaret Torres stood up next. "I agree. This has gone too far. The HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. We need new leadership." Several other people voiced their agreement. Patricia looked around the room and seemed to realize that she had lost the support of a significant portion of the community. Her face was pale now instead of red. Robert Chen stood up and addressed the room. "As treasurer, I have to be concerned about the financial health of the HOA. If what Mr. Shapiro is saying is accurate and we continue down this path, we could face bankruptcy. I think we need to seriously consider his proposal to settle this matter." Brenda Carmichael nodded. "I agree. I think we acted hastily and without full information. We should rescind the special assessments and work with the county to make sure all residents are properly informed about fire prevention requirements." Patricia looked at her fellow board members with a sense of betrayal. "You are going to side with them against me. After everything I have done for this community." "We are not siding against you," Robert said carefully. "We are trying to protect the HOA from legal liability." Patricia gathered her papers and stood up. "If that is how you feel, then I resign from this board, effective immediately. You can deal with this mess yourselves." She stormed out of the community center, leaving the remaining board members staring at each other in shock. After a moment of stunned silence, Brenda took over as acting president and worked with David Shapiro to draft a resolution that would rescind the special assessments, provide written notice to all residents about county fire prevention requirements, and establish new procedures for board meetings and communication. The resolution passed unanimously, with everyone in attendance voting to approve it. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It had been an exhausting few weeks, but we had won. The story did not end there, though. A few days later, I was working on my Firebreaks again when I saw a Bell County Sheriff's vehicle pulling up my driveway. My heart sank, thinking that somehow Patricia had found another way to cause trouble. But when the deputy got out, it was not Deputy Martinez. It was an investigator named Detective Sarah Ramirez. "Mr. Harrison, I am Detective Ramirez with the Bell County Sheriff's Office. I need to ask you some questions about the Meadowbrook Hills HOA." "Of course," I said, climbing down from the tractor. "What is this about?" We have received multiple complaints from residents about financial irregularities within the HOA. The Texas Real Estate Commission has also forwarded information from your attorney's complaint. We are investigating possible embezzlement and fraud. I was stunned. Embezzlement? By who? I cannot discuss the details of an ongoing investigation, Detective Ramirez said. But I need to ask you about your interactions with the HOA board, specifically Patricia Hendricks. Can you tell me about any financial transactions or irregularities you have noticed? I told her about the special assessment letters and the mysterious board meetings that had been held without proper notice. I also mentioned that several neighbors had complained over the years about HOA funds being spent on things that did not seem to benefit the community. Detective Ramirez took detailed notes and asked me to provide copies of all my documentation, which I was happy to do. She interviewed Tessa as well, and then went to speak with other neighbors. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded. It turned out that Patricia Hendricks had been siphoning money from the HOA account for years. She had created fake invoices from vendors that did not exist, approved payments to herself for consulting fees that were never disclosed to the membership, and had even used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses like her car payment and vacation trips. Robert Chen, the treasurer, had been keeping a separate set of books that documented all the discrepancies, but he had been too intimidated by Patricia to speak up. When the investigation began, he came forward with all his evidence, which made the case against Patricia much stronger. The total amount embezzled was over $180,000, spread across 4 years. Patricia was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and abuse of fiduciary duty. Her husband, who apparently had no idea what she had been doing, filed for divorce almost immediately. The HOA had to hire a forensic accountant to sort through the mess and determine exactly where all the money had gone. It turned out that Patricia had been using HOA funds to maintain her lifestyle after her husband's business had failed a few years earlier. She had been projecting an image of success while secretly drowning in debt. The criminal case took several months to wind through the court system. Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant she had to sell her house and most of her possessions. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. The HOA had to take out a loan to cover the shortfall in the budget until the restitution was paid. Brenda Carmichael took over as president and immediately implemented a series of reforms, including mandatory financial audits, term limits for board members, and a requirement that all board meetings be recorded and minutes made available to all residents. I finally finished my firebreak maintenance in late July, just before the hottest part of the Texas summer. Marcus Williams came out to inspect the work and gave it his approval. He told me that several other residents in the area had reached out to him for guidance on their own properties, which was exactly what the county had been hoping for. That August, we had a close call with a wildfire that started a few miles away from our community. The fire was caused by lightning striking a dead tree, and it spread quickly through the dry grass and brush. The firefighters were able to contain it before it reached any homes, but they specifically mentioned that the firebreaks in our area had made their job much easier and had probably prevented significant property damage. Jake Sullivan organized a community barbecue to celebrate the fact that everyone's homes were safe. It was a beautiful evening, with the sun setting over the Texas hills and the smell of grilled food filling the air. Neighbors who had been at odds during the HOA conflict were laughing and talking together. The community felt stronger than it had in years. Tessa and I stood together watching the kids play on the lawn of the community center. "That was quite an ordeal," she said, leaning against me. "It was," I agreed, "but it worked out in the end." "Do you think Patricia knew how much damage she was doing?" Tessa asked. "Not just with the money, but with the way she treated people." I thought about it. "I think she convinced herself that she was doing the right thing. She probably started out wanting to maintain property values and create a nice community. But somewhere along the way, she started believing that she was the only one who knew what was best for everyone. And when she started having financial problems, it was easy to rationalize taking a little here and a little there. Then it snowballed." "It is sad, really," Tessa said. "She could have just asked for help." "Pride is a powerful thing," I said. "And the need to maintain appearances can make people do terrible things." Marcus Williams approached us with a plate of food. "Great party. Your community has really come together." "Thanks to you," I said. "If you had not shown up at that first meeting with the facts and the law on your side, I do not know how it would have turned out." "I was just doing my job," Marcus said with a smile, "but I am glad it helped. Fire prevention is serious business, and I am happy to see people taking it seriously now." As the evening wore on, Brenda Carmichael stood up to make an announcement. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and for your patience during these difficult months. The HOA has been through a lot, but we are coming out stronger. I also want to publicly apologize to Sam Harrison and everyone else who was mistreated by the previous board. You were doing the right thing and you should have been supported, not attacked." People applauded, and several neighbors came over to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. It felt good to be vindicated, but more than that, it felt good to be part of a community that was learning and growing. The following year brought more positive changes. The HOA implemented a new landscaping committee that actually worked with residents instead of against them. They created a fire prevention awareness program in partnership with the Texas A&M Forest Service, and Marcus Williams became a regular speaker at community events. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased, contrary to Patricia's dire predictions. Potential buyers liked the fact that the community took fire safety seriously and had responsible leadership. Several real estate agents mentioned Meadowbrook Hills as one of the best managed HOA communities in Bell County. I continued to maintain my Firebreaks according to county requirements, and the work became routine rather than controversial. Other neighbors with large properties followed suit, and our area became a model for fire prevention in the region. The county even featured our community in a training video for other rural HOAs. Detective Ramirez closed her investigation after Patricia's sentencing, but she told me that the case had led to increased scrutiny of HOA finances throughout the county. Several other associations had been found to have similar problems, though none as severe as Patricia's embezzlement. The Texas Real Estate Commission implemented new oversight requirements for HOA boards, including mandatory financial transparency and regular audits. One afternoon in October, about a year and a half after the whole ordeal began, I was doing some routine maintenance on my tractor when a car pulled up. I did not recognize the vehicle at first, but when the driver got out, I realized it was Patricia Hendricks. She had been released on parole after serving 18 months of her sentence. She looked different than I remembered. She was thinner, her hair was no longer carefully styled, and she seemed smaller somehow. She walked toward me hesitantly, like she was not sure if she should be there. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "I know I am probably the last person you want to see. I set down the wrench I was holding and waited for her to continue. "I wanted to apologize," Patricia said, "for everything. For the way I treated you, for the money I stole, for the damage I did to the community. I have had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. There is no excuse." I studied her for a moment. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I was cautious. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to say I am sorry. You were right about everything. The Firebreaks, the county requirements, all of it. I was too proud to admit I was wrong, and I hurt a lot of people because of it." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "The embezzlement, I mean." Patricia looked down at the ground. "My husband's business failed and we had so much debt. I was terrified that people would find out we were struggling. I was the HOA president. I was supposed to have it all together. So I took a little money just to get through a rough patch. But then it was not enough and I took more. And I had to cover my tracks, which meant being even more controlling and aggressive as HOA president. It became this terrible spiral." "That must have been exhausting," I said. "It was," Patricia admitted. "Living a lie every day, pretending everything was fine while I was falling apart inside. Prison was horrible, but in a way it was also a relief. I did not have to pretend anymore." We stood in silence for a moment. I did not know what to say. Part of me was still angry about what she had put me and my neighbors through. But another part of me felt a strange kind of sympathy for this broken woman who had destroyed her own life. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I am living with my sister in Temple," Patricia said. "I am working at a grocery store trying to pay back the restitution. It will take me years, probably decades. I sold everything I had, but it was not nearly enough. I will be paying this debt for the rest of my life." "That is a heavy burden," I said. "It is what I deserve," Patricia said. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, and I am truly sorry." She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "The Firebreaks saved homes during that fire last year. I heard about it while I was in prison. You were protecting people and I tried to stop you. I will have to live with that." After she drove away, I thought about the conversation for a long time. Tessa came home from work and found me sitting on the porch, staring out at the Firebreaks I had maintained. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down next to me. "Patricia came by today," I said. "She apologized." Tessa raised her eyebrows. "Really? How did that go?" "It was strange," I admitted. "She seems like a completely different person, broken but maybe on her way to being better." "Do you forgive her?" Tessa asked. "I do not know," I said honestly. "What she did was wrong on so many levels. But seeing her today, I do not think she is a monster. She is just a person who made terrible choices and is living with the consequences." "You are a better person than I am," Tessa said. "I am still mad at her for what she put us through." "I am mad too," I said. "But I also feel like holding on to that anger is not helping anyone. She is paying for what she did. The community is better now. Maybe that is enough." As the sun set over the Texas hills, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. It had started with me simply trying to maintain firebreaks on my property as required by the county. Something so straightforward had spiraled into a major conflict that exposed corruption, led to criminal charges, and ultimately changed an entire community. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, standing up for what is right is not always easy, but it is necessary. If I had backed down when Patricia first threatened me, the embezzlement might have continued for years, costing the community even more money and causing more damage. Second, no one is above the law, not even HOA board members who think they have absolute authority. County, state, and federal regulations exist for good reasons, and HOAs cannot override them no matter how many rules they write into their bylaws. Third, Transparency and accountability are essential for any organization, especially one that has power over people's homes and property. The reforms that Brenda Carmichael implemented as the new HOA president, including financial audits and recorded meetings, should have been in place from the beginning. Fourth, communities are stronger when people work together rather than being ruled by fear and intimidation. The neighborhood was much more cohesive and friendly now than it had been under Patricia's leadership, even though some people had initially supported her strict approach. Finally, people can change and grow, even after making terrible mistakes. Patricia's apology might not erase the harm she caused, but it showed that she was at least trying to take responsibility for her actions. Whether she would successfully rebuild her life remained to be seen, but she was making an effort. Life went on in Meadowbrook Hills. The HOA continued to function smoothly under new leadership. Property values remained strong. Residents maintained their fire breaks and took fire safety seriously. The community became known as a model for responsible HOA governance in Bell County. I kept running my bush hog across the back 40 acres every year, maintaining the fire breaks that the county required. No one complained anymore. In fact, when other residents heard the familiar sound of the tractor engine, they often waved or gave me a thumbs up. It had become a symbol of the community's commitment to safety and responsibility. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, Marcus Williams invited me to speak at a county fire safety conference about my experience. I talked about the importance of fire breaks, the challenges of dealing with HOA resistance, and how community support made all the difference. Several other rural HOA representatives were in the audience, and they asked thoughtful questions about how to implement similar programs in their neighborhoods. After my presentation, a man approached me. He was in his 30s, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that marked him as someone who worked outdoors. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Tom. I live in a small subdivision outside of Copperas Cove. Our HOA is giving me grief about maintaining fire breaks on my property, just like what happened to you. Do you have any advice?" I smiled. "Document everything. Get the county requirements in writing. Know the law, and do not back down when you are doing the right thing. If enough people stand together, the HOA will have to listen." "Did you ever regret standing up to them?" Tom asked. I thought about it. "No, it was difficult and stressful, but it was worth it. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is easier to just go along with unreasonable demands." Tom shook my hand. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The experience that had started with a simple bush hogging operation to maintain fire breaks had turned into something much bigger. It had exposed corruption, led to reforms, strengthened a community, and now was helping other people facing similar challenges. Tessa was in the kitchen when I got home preparing dinner. She looked up and smiled. "How was the conference?" "Good," I said, kissing her cheek. "I met someone who is going through the same thing we went through. It felt good to be able to help." "You are becoming quite the fire safety advocate," she teased. "I never expected any of this," I admitted. "I just wanted to maintain my property and comply with county regulations. I did not set out to fight an HOA or expose embezzlement." "But you did," Tessa said, "and you made a difference. A lot of people are better off because you were willing to stand up for what is right." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the unlikely journey from that first day when Deputy Martinez and Patricia Hendricks showed up to complain about my bush hog, to the criminal investigation and trial, to the community reforms and the new relationships that had formed. It had been a wild ride, but we had come through it stronger. The sound of coyotes howling in the distance reminded me why the firebreaks were so important. This was wild country, beautiful but dangerous. Fire was always a risk, especially during the hot, dry Texas summers. By maintaining those firebreaks, I was not just following county regulations. I was protecting my family, my neighbors, and the community we had all chosen to call home. The following spring brought new challenges and opportunities. The HOA organized a community-wide fire prevention day, with demonstrations from the local fire department, information booths from the Texas A&M Forest Service, and hands-on training for residents about creating defensible space around their homes. It was a huge success, with over 200 people attending. Marcus Williams told me that Meadowbrook Hills had become a case study for successful rural fire prevention programs. Other counties in Texas were using our community as an example of how to implement similar initiatives. He asked if I would be willing to be interviewed for a state fire safety publication, and I agreed. The article was published in the summer, and it generated a lot of interest. I received emails and calls from property owners across Texas who were dealing with similar HOA conflicts. Some were facing resistance to solar panel installations that were protected by state law. Others were being prevented from installing rainwater collection systems or planting native, fire-resistant vegetation. In each case, the HOA was overstepping its authority and preventing residents from doing things that were not only legal but beneficial. I started keeping a list of resources and referring people to attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. David Shapiro, my attorney, told me that he had seen a significant increase in HOA conflict cases, and he attributed some of it to the publicity around our situation. People were learning that they did not have to simply accept unreasonable HOA demands. One day in August, almost 3 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, I received a letter from the Texas Real Estate Commission. They were thanking me for my role in exposing the financial irregularities in the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, and informing me that they had implemented new regulations based on lessons learned from our case. All HOAs in Texas with more than 50 members were now required to undergo annual independent financial audits, and board members had to complete training on fiduciary responsibilities. The letter also mentioned that Patricia Hendricks' case had been used as a cautionary tale in board member training programs across the state. While I did not take any pleasure in her downfall, I was glad that something positive had come from it. That evening, Jake Sullivan and I were sitting on my porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset. He had become a good friend over the years, and we often spent time together talking about community issues and life in general. "You know what I appreciate about you," Jake said. "You did not make this about yourself. You could have used all the publicity to become some kind of anti-HOA crusader, but instead you focused on the real issues: fire safety, financial transparency, community governance. You kept it constructive." "I never wanted to be at war with the HOA," I said. "I just wanted to maintain my fire breaks and live in peace. Everything else happened because Patricia forced the issue." "A lot of people would have given in," Jake observed. "It would have been easier to just stop the work and hope for the best. But you stood your ground, and now the whole community is safer because of it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors change across the sky. The fire breaks stretched out behind my property, creating clear lines in the landscape. They might not be aesthetically beautiful to everyone, but to me, they represented something important: the willingness to do what is right even when it is difficult. As summer turned to fall, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued to improve. The HOA organized regular social events that brought neighbors together. The financial situation stabilized as Patricia's restitution payments slowly came in. New families moved into the neighborhood, attracted by the reputation for good governance and community involvement. I continued my work maintaining the Firebreaks, and each year it became more routine. The initial controversy seemed like a distant memory to most people, though those of us who had lived through it would never forget the lessons we learned. The story of my conflict with the HOA eventually became part of the community's history, told to new residents as an example of how the neighborhood had evolved and grown. It was a reminder that even small communities can face significant challenges, and that ordinary people standing up for what is right can make an extraordinary difference. On the 4th anniversary of that first day, when Patricia and Deputy Martinez showed up to complain about my bush hog, I was out on the tractor again, doing my annual firebreak maintenance. The morning was cool and clear, with a gentle breeze that kept the dust down. As I worked, I thought about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. I was still doing the same work, maintaining the same firebreaks on the same property. But the context was completely different. Instead of controversy and conflict, there was support and understanding. Instead of threats and fines, there was cooperation and appreciation. The work was the same, but the meaning behind it had evolved. As I finished the last section and shut down the bush hog, I saw Tessa walking across the field toward me with a thermos of cold water. She had taken the day off from school to spend time with me, something we tried to do occasionally. "All done?" she asked, handing me the water. "For another year," I confirmed, taking a long drink. "Same time next year I will be out here again." "And no one will complain," Tessa said with a smile. "No one will complain," I agreed. We walked back to the house together, hand in hand, looking out at the firebreaks that had started such an unexpected journey. The land was safe, the community was strong, and justice had been served. It had not been easy, but it had been worth it. That night, as I fell asleep, I thought about the future. There would always be challenges in any community. There would always be disagreements about rules and regulations. There would always be people who tried to abuse their authority. But as long as there were also people willing to stand up for what is right, willing to fight for truth and transparency, willing to put the community's needs above personal convenience, there would be hope. The story of my conflict with the HOA about maintaining firebreaks had a happy ending, but it was not just about me. It was about everyone who stood together to demand accountability and responsible governance. It was about a community that learned and grew from adversity. It was about the importance of following the law, even when someone in authority tells you not to. Most importantly, it was a reminder that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to be intimidated or silenced. The firebreaks I maintained every year were not just physical barriers against wildfire. They were also symbolic barriers against corruption, abuse of power, and the kind of governance that puts personal pride above community welfare. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees outside my window, and I felt a deep sense of peace. The work I had done, both with the bush hog and in standing up to the HOA, had made a real difference, and that was all anyone could ask for.